I'm Lora Lynn Snow. I'm the Executive Director of the Ariel-Ann Performing Arts Center, which is the home to the Ohio Valley Symphony. And I'm here today with Bill Baker, my teacher and friend, and we're going to talk a little bit about his life. It struck us that Tabito, who was such an important figure in oboe life in this country, generated a number of principal oboists in all the symphonies across this country. And now the grandchildren, if you will, of his are populating those orchestras. And I've had the great fortune in my life to study with two wonderful teachers, Ted Hager, who was the very last Curtis student of Tabito's, and Bill Baker, who is a grandchild of a Tabito student. And this is William P. Baker. So, how did you come about to study oboe?
It was, the oboe came to me, I didn't go to it. I was in high school. I had taken the clarinet in grade school, didn't particularly like it, and I was in high school, and as PE, you had to play football, and I was the 97-pound tackling dummy. And I discovered that if you were in the band, you wouldn't have to take PE because the band marched. So that was for me. I got in the beginner's band on clarinet, played it for about 6 weeks. Then my band director, Mr. Herbert Cagle, gave me an oboe and a fingering chart. And I looked on the fingering chart and saw that the lowest note was a low B flat. So I proceeded to play a low B flat. And he went, "My goodness, my first oboe player can't even play that note." And that was instant gratification. And it was a love affair from the very beginning. I loved the oboe. I got into classical music. I well remember Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony and those wonderful solos. And I couldn't get enough of that, along with, of course, the Von Suppé overtures, which didn't have much oboe, but they were fun to listen to at the time. And that's how it all got started. I became a junior in high school and was fortunate enough to make the Arkansas State Band, and more gratification. And then, of course, my senior year I did that and decided I wanted to be a music major on the oboe.
Did you play a lot of band transcriptions or orchestra transcriptions to band music?
That point in time, that's about all we had. We didn't have very many original band concerts and concert pieces. I got to know, of course, the William Tell Overture of Rossini. Just about anything that was classical and transmittable to the band, it was available. And there was a wonderful bass clarinet player in Philadelphia by the name of Lucien Callier. He transcribed about everything that moved into the band repertoire, and so that's how we were introduced to classical music.
That was kind of my experience too. I heard a pop song on the radio, and I said, I want to learn to play the oboe. And we also did a lot of orchestra transcriptions for band, and that's where I learned my orchestra music.
I didn't play in an orchestra until I was in college.
Well, no, I was a senior in high school, I think, when I started playing in an orchestra. Who was your very first teacher? Oboe teacher.
The very first oboe teacher was a gentleman by the name of Walter Barsnick. He was actually a clarinet player, but I enrolled in, had a scholarship at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond, Louisiana. And he was a great guy, but he's a clarinet player. So that sort of steered me toward New Orleans and John Mack. And about 1954, around in there, I was playing in the Baton Rouge Symphony, which was a professional paid orchestra, but I would go down to New Orleans and study with John Mack. And we've been, until his death, we were dear friends. He was my teacher. I came to Ohio State in 1962, and
how old were you then?
I was 26 years old.
And you were the first oboe teacher hired at
First
Ohio
oboe
State.
teacher hired in 1962. I was in love with the Cleveland Orchestra and George Sell, and I took a couple of lessons from Mark Lifshee, who was the very celebrated principal oboe in Cleveland. The problem is, he couldn't get along with Zell. And the whole morale of the wind section was kind of down because they were always fighting.
That's not good.
Not good, but it ended up that Zell released Lifshee, and I was heartbroken. But in 1964, Maestro Zell hired John Mack from National Symphony, and so I just resumed my partnership with him at that time. And all of his tenure with the Cleveland Orchestra, we were together quite a bit, actually. I would go up and study, and he would come down and master class my students, of which you were part of at that time. And, or he would come down and stay with us in our home and play golf. And he came down one time with the personnel manager of Cleveland, David Zauder. Both gentlemen are now passed on, but it was great being with them and being around them. And my friendship with Mac did a transition from just being pupil to being a friend. And I appreciate those years very much.
Well, there were good years, and so you also started some ensembles when you came here to Columbus, Ohio.
We started the Ohio Wind Quintet at Ohio State, and
What year was that?
That was 1962 when I came.
Right when you came.
We started the quintet,
And who was in that with you?
that would have been Donald E. McGinnis on flute, who is still alive. He's 96 years old. And I just recently spoke to him on the phone, and he's very spry for 96 and doing very well. Clarinet was Robert Titus. Bassoon was George Wilson, a music educator. And horn player was William Kearns, a most marvelous player, one of the best I've ever had the privilege of playing with.
And you played in other ensembles too.
Oh yeah, I became principal oboe in the Columbus Symphony. That was a tenure that lasted 14 years. And we did all the major repertoire, and at that time you could have guest conductors like Aaron Copland, Igor Stravinsky, he spent some time here, and others from all the conducting pool mostly. And I had a wonderful time with Columbus. It got to be a point where you either went full-time with the orchestra, or I had a very large, good class of oboists at Ohio State. I had to make the choice, so I, of course, chose Ohio State, a tenured position with all the benefits thereof, and that was my life's work. After I left the Columbus Symphony, a young upstart conductor by the name of Timothy Russell, he and a gentleman by the name of Richard Early founded...
Trombone player.
Yeah, trombone player. Founded the Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra. So for 10 more years, I played principal in that.
You were also instrumental in getting that started too, weren't you? And you were on the
Yes,
board?
I was in on the ground floor. I was a founding member, and I worked with both Tim and Richard to get that into fruition.
And you were on the board of directors?
I was on the first player elected to the board.
And the Pro Musica is still going and going quite strong.
Oh, yes. It has never had a red ink year. It has been flourishing and doing well. And Timothy has retired, and they have a new young conductor whose name I never really knew. But he seems to bring an excitement to them, and they are doing very well.
Well, and so it is possible to run an orchestra in the black and be successful and get a good audience, as they've done here and as we've done with Ohio Valley Symphony.
I'm telling you, hats off, because most orchestras that I've been in have had money problems at one time. Columbus, at that time, no. And Pro Musica, never. And even an orchestra over in Newark, Ohio, I conducted, we didn't have any red ink problems. We turned it over when I retired from it to an entity with money in the bank.
Now, you speaking of that, so you retired from Ohio State after 25 years.
Right.
And then you moved on and took a part-time job.
I taught part-time as an adjunct professor at Capital University, which is a Lutheran school in Columbus, Ohio. I had several wonderful students that have graduated and are out doing great things.
Gone on to have good careers in music.
Right. And so I did that for 15 years until I became 70 years old, and I decided it's time to let's stop this.
But you also, like many performers, well, not like many performers, but a number of performers that also have delved into the conducting world.
Well, I founded in Newark, Ohio, an entity we call the Land O Legend Philharmonic. And we paid our players, we didn't charge our audience, and we were mostly a pops and children concert orchestra. And we did that for 15 years, and we put ensembles in the schools, woodwind quintet, brass quintet, string quartet, and our job was to educate. And as I said earlier, we ended up with a surplus, and we always, of course, paid our players. We had good financial backing from State Farm Insurance, which was based with their regional office in Newark, Ohio, and the Longaberger Corporation, which was at its height at that time.
And it was a nice orchestra. I played there, and I also attended some concerts.
Right. We did some good things. We did an Ohio premiere of a children's opera called Sir Douglas Fir. After 9/11, we did a community concert for the community just 1 week after, and that was a great success. We had the First Methodist Church Choir and the high school choir with us, and it was all patriotic and a source of great pride to me to be able to do that.
And another orchestra that ran in the black.
Right.
So all the press that the ones running in the red are getting, they should turn around and look at the ones that are working successfully and see what they could learn from it.
Yeah.
So you had a woodwind quintet there that you played in.
We had a woodwind quintet, and we would do the school concerts. I, of course, played oboe, and my dear friend, who was then the county coroner, played bassoon, Robert Raker, and members of the orchestra, Beth Morris on flute, and
your lovely wife Vivian on horn.
oh, my wife Vivian played horn, of course, and William Eisenhardt played the clarinet.
It was a good group.
It was a good group, and we had a long stay in the schools, and we did about every grade school in Licking County and some in Fairfield and even down into Athens County.
Thousands of kids got to hear you all play.
Right. I figured one time, I don't know what point in time, but we had played to over 60,000 grade school kids.
That's an impressive number.
Yeah, it is and was.
Well, what would you say was the most rewarding thing about your music career? Can you pinpoint one or two things, or is it a long list?
Most rewarding, I think, was observing my students playing their recitals. That really was a culmination of a lot of hard work, and their talent and everything pleased me. That was probably the most rewarding thing I can delve upon. I asked John Mack one time, I said, how many times in concert have things gone so well that you thought, this is it? He didn't waste a minute, he said, 2 times.
What? And those were?
Did
he tell you?
I didn't press him. And I can think of a few, but not very many. You know, there's always something. A lot of hard work to sit up there and say, play a Schubert symphony, and there's just so much going on, and so much can go wrong, and this, that, and the other, and I just can't remember too many great times, but there were a few.
Yeah, and we've done some things together. You soloed in front of your several orchestras yourself.
Yeah. Well, I went to Carnegie Hall to play a concert with bassoonist Robert Cochran, and I was in the midst of playing a show, and you subbed for me.
I did, the chorus line.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about La Cage aux Folles.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, that one. I left in the midst of that to go do this recital and come back, and the conductor, I must say, really liked you.
Well, you trained me well.
Yeah.
What about some of your students, some of your notable students? You've had quite a few go on to some pretty hefty careers.
Well, the one that stands out foremost is Lora Lynn. She was a student of mine in high school and then went to Ohio State. She went from Ohio State to Juilliard and studied with one of Mac's students, Elaine Dubois, who and still is principal in the Met. And Laura became the English horn player in the Met, a position she held for 10 years. She married a wonderful bassoonist by the name of Richard Ranty, and he was principal in Boston. So she went on to Boston and became, for 12 years, the principal in the Pops, Boston Pops.
And you've also got students that are out teaching in universities.
Oh yeah, there's Eric Olson, who is a master teacher at Florida State University.
Quite a wonderful player.
Oh, quite a wonderful player. There was a real cut-up by the name of Jim Brody, who went on to be and is the professor of oboe at University of Colorado Boulder.
And those were Ohio State students. James Prodan.
Right, James Prodan had a wonderful career as archivist for the International Double Reed Society and oboe professor at University of North Carolina Greensboro.
And Patty Pogazowski-Grutzmacher.
Patty is head of music ed at Kent State University, and I didn't know until recently she goes to Poland every 2 years to be involved with a state-run music camp in Krakow.
Well, she's quite an educator. She did a lovely master class at Oboes on the Ohio last summer.
Correct. There's no question about that. She is a wonderful player. I think she still plays in one of the orchestras in Northeast Ohio.
Yes, she does. And also, after you left Ohio State, you went to Capitol. You had some notable students from that era, too.
Well, Dan Ripple stands out. He went to the Air Force Band as principal oboist, and
John Young. Quite a fine oboe player.
Quite a fine oboe player. He ran into a disaster after he was at the height of his power. He was about to be second oboe in Pittsburgh, and he had a lung collapse, and that was really a tragedy. So he ended up being personnel manager of the Columbus Symphony.
But he went on to study mandolin and...
He's an artist on the mandolin.
And computer.
Yeah, and computers, right.
He writes all kinds of music programs now.
Yes, he does, yeah.
And let's see, Emily
Hofer.
Van
Nyman now. Went to be English horn with the Cincinnati Ballet. She plays second oboe in your orchestra.
Yes, she does. She's a very fine player.
And she is very conscientious and very good and wonderful to play with. I love to do trio sonatas with her on recital at Capitol because she has perfect pitch, so you had no problems.
She is very good to play with.
You just played.
A real treasure, yeah.
Right.
And you've been down to play with Ohio Valley Symphony a few times. You got to do English horn, which you never got to do in the orchestra because you were always busy being principal.
Yeah, we did Copeland's Quiet City with the orchestra, and you and I did a premiere of a piece by a local composer for English horn and oboe
that we commissioned, and then one of your other students started off the oboe, what became Oboes on the Ohio.
Oh yeah.
Karen Burrs Pfeiffer.
Right.
Had a party, and Karen wanted to honor Bill and bring in all the students, and we had a fabulous party at her home.
Right.
With way too many people for her place, and she said.
Actually, I wrote her after and said, I am overwhelmed, and it was overwhelming.
Yeah, it was amazing, all the people that showed up.
It is. I was so, again, overwhelmed. I can't think of a better adjective to describe it.
But when we started talking about having the next party, she realized she couldn't have it at her house. And at that point, we had just finished the restoration of the entire building, the Ariel, and I offered that building up for what I thought was going to be a party and turned into Oboes on the Ohio.
Correct.
Which you have been involved with from the start.
From the start, and...
which is a double reed festival in Gallipolis, Ohio.
Yep. And you literally have put Gallipolis on the map musically. I remember seeing that hall you resurrected, and it was unresurrectable to me. And you took no for an answer and did it. And I'm very proud of you for doing that.
Well, it's quite a nice facility, and now that we've got the space to be able to spread out and do that, we've had some notable oboists there.
Mhm.
Our first star was Colin Meyer with the Quartetto Gelato,
Right.
who came in and
I was there with him in the first oboes on the Ohio.
and in the boat when we took the pictures,
Oh, he was a crazy guy. He'd hold on to that boat and oboe.
dangling off the edge.
Oboe right into the Ohio River if he dropped it.
And we've also had Dwight Perry from the Cincinnati Symphony.
Right.
And Betsy Sturdivant from the Columbus Symphony that have come down and been guest artists at our
Right.
festival.
Right.
And I'm hoping that this can be a part of our legacy with that.
Yeah.
Thinking about when I was talking with Ted Hager, who I studied with in high school,
Mhm.
and it's Ted, who is 80, I believe now, and he just sighed and he says, well, I guess I'm one of the last ones. And he was indeed the last registered student at Curtis to study with Tabuteau, and that's what kind of sparked the idea that we need to investigate this train of oboe thought and education and
Well,
keep that alive. And we
I
can do
think-
that now with these techniques of YouTube and
Right.
recording techniques.
I think it's a wonderful idea because Marcel Tabuteau revolutionized oboe playing in this country. Oboes prior to him did not blend well. They were very bright and metallic sounding. And you can attribute some of that to Leopold Stokowski. He was conducting in Philadelphia, and he wanted this lush, warm sound. And a screamy, screechy oboe just didn't work. And so with Tabuteau and Stokowski, they revolutionized the sound of the oboe in this country with the long, straight reed that we use.
And then he passed it on, and his
He
students
passed
spread
it
out.
on, and right. And I remember when I played those short reeds, I didn't know any better, and Lord. I remember one pep rally when I was in high school, and they recorded it for the radio station, and all you could hear in the marches was the damned oboe. Me! Band director gave me pretty good writing about that. Didn't offend him, but he said, all I can hear is oboe.
What do you think? What do you think? Tell us about some of the conductors you played for,
Well, there's some,
or favorite conductor story. Everybody's got conductor stories.
well, I've got a lot of bad ones.
Tell about the good ones.
There came through an Easter musical by the celebrated bass of the Met, Jerome Hines. And he brought a conductor who did the Philadelphia Chamber Orchestra at that time by the name of Ansel Brusilov. He was wonderful. He was fantastic, and it was such a treat to play for him because he made playing easy. The other conductor, I would be remiss if I didn't mention him, I had in Baton Rouge. A gentleman by the name of Emil Cooper. He was Russian. Cooper does not sound Russian, but there was a family of Coopers in Russia. He conducted the Met and retired, and we had him down there, and he was unbelievable. He could take a mediocre orchestra and make it sound like the New York Philharmonic. He was that good. I was deathly afraid of him. He was only about 5 feet tall, but he knew when you were going to screw up before you screwed up. But I would go to his hotel and go into the ballroom, and he'd get on the piano and we'd play licks of the upcoming concerts, and he worked with me, and I'm eternally grateful to that man. Stravinsky was not a bad conductor, but it was all pretty cut and dry. You know, he knew the tune because he wrote it. And but his stick technique was quite good. Copeland was kind of a nasty bird. He just couldn't get through any human warmth, and therefore it was bam. But all my years with Evan Whalen, and he had a long tenure with the Columbus Symphony, he was a good conductor and everything, but he was very boring. You'd just go to sleep in rehearsals, and you knew what he was going to do when he stopped back to letter A and so forth. But a very wonderful accompanist. We would have soloists, big name soloists, come in, and he was impeccable with his accompanying. And I've never played under a conductor as a good an accompanist as Evan Whalen.
And who were some of those exciting soloists that were favorites of yours?
Say again now?
Some of the soloists that stood out.
Itzhak Perlman. All of the great sopranos from the Med. Names escape me at the moment. All the great pianists. I remember Claudio Lorau very well. Leonid Kogan from Russia, violinist. They all came through Columbus.
What do you think? What do you see, or maybe I should say, hear about music that has improved since you started?
Well, I don't know whether it's an improvement or not, but when I auditioned in 1954 for Baton Rouge, there were 3 of us that showed up. Now there'd be 73 oboists for a job that doesn't pay a living wage. We're too successful in turning out students. That's one thing that strikes me as being, maybe we should work harder to cull the flock.
Or maybe we should just make more playing opportunities.
That would be good,
that's...
but then there comes the wonderful object of money. It's just very hard.
Well, it's hard, but it's not undoable.
Right, not undoable. You've proven that yourself.
Now, what instrument brands do you prefer?
By far the Lora, and I have had a flirtation with the Yamaha. Like it. I understand Betty Camise, the second oboe player in Cleveland, plays a Yamaha because the low register is so easy to play.
It is.
And it behaves.
Well, you got me started on Yamahas. We
Yeah,
switched over from Loras and
I
went
fussed
to
with
Yamahas.
one and enjoyed my tenure with it, but I went back to Lora Royale.
The Yamahas are not quite as heavy, especially the Royales.
Well, that's why John Mack didn't like the Royale. It's too heavy.
And I think there's something to be said for women's hands being smaller, and instruments have been designed for men's hands, and more women have hand problems playing.
That's
my take on it, but that's because I've lived through that.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
Well,
that's your take.
That's my take on it. Now, what about Stevens Hewitt? You mentioned to me once.
Stevens Hewitt has been a friend for many years. He has written some marvelous oboe technique books with his philosophy of how to use your wind and play. And I literally use those as a Bible of how to. And we owe him a great debt of attitude. He doesn't know it, but he taught me how to play a lot on the oboe. You know. Now, John Mack taught me how to play, but I learned so much from Stephen Hewitt's books.
Who would you say was your biggest reed-making influence?
Reed making, John Mack could take a reed, he'd go chuck, 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 boom. He was marvelous at making beautiful reeds, but a little difficult in teaching you. You just had to go out and figure it out on your own, which I did, you know. Mm-hmm. And he did too. I remember in New Orleans, he told me, he said, I'm down here and I'm away from Tabito. It is very humid and hot. I put a towel around my neck and then I figured it out.
It would be quite a change from the climate in Philadelphia.
Right, down to the humid box.
What about your involvement with the International Double Reed Society? You've been in that, you're a lifetime member, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
And you organized and
I
ran a convention one year?
Yeah, I got involved when it was in Toronto, Canada. And went to my first meeting there back in the early 70s, I think. It was a very young organization at that time, and I got hooked on it. I met the famous lady Evelyn Rothwell up there, and they had a nice meeting, and I became involved and ended up being at one time vice president and secretary of the IDRS. And I don't go to the conventions anymore, but I just ravenously read the journal when it comes out.
Yes, you got yours before me and had it read before the one came in the mail to me.
Well, I'm a donor.
And what about the convention that you hosted at Ohio State?
Yeah, we hosted a very successful convention at Ohio State. We had Mac in the oboe section from Cleveland down.
And Philadelphia.
And the whole Philadelphia section from Delancey to Steve Hewitt and
not too shabby.
And Louis Rosenblatt. And they all were a great presence. I've been friends through the death of Louis and Delancey with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and when they come to town, I'd always host them and be with Richard Woodhams and Louis Rosenblatt and Steve, and it has been a great wedding. I do not know the new English horn player or who plays second oboe anymore, but early on we were great pals. They gave me a wonderful book, which I gave to you, called Concerto for Camera. And it is a compilation of pictures of soloists, composers, orchestra members, etc. in the 20th century. And essentially, it is a great history of 20th century music.
A pictorial history, yeah.
Yes. And it's a wonderful book.
It is an amazing compilation of the greats of our...
Oh yeah, the greats of our time. You name the composer, from Villa-Lobos to Stravinsky, they're all in there, and all with the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Well, it's our hope with this project, starting with you and passing this on, that other people will go ahead and start doing their own interviews and adding to this and adding to the wealth of history, because you have to look back to know where you're going ahead.
True. Well, we owe so much to our teachers, and they have done right by us, and for posterity, I salute you with this project.
Well, this is yet another one of our joint ventures, isn't it?
Yeah, afraid so.
Yet another. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we hope you carry on this tradition of the next generation.